Okay, just record. 1 second.
Recording in progress.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Tonight's Wednesday night, so it's halacha and Tanya. Last Wednesday night, we started learning the laws of what's called halachos asuras, forbidden foods. So we're learning about blood you're not allowed to eat blood, so you have to be careful with blood in the eggs. By the way, was the issue brought up last week, like what age are kids able to check eggs? So we're speaking then best would be over bar bas mitzvah, but again, many poskim write that if it's, let's say, white eggs, brown eggs have a lot of blood spots in it. But if it's white eggs, even kids that are 9 years old and mature are able to really check eggs like that, because it's not a big thing to check, and most eggs, a vast majority of eggs today, unless if they're brown eggs, don't have these blood spots and so on. Okay, we're also talking about, the last thing we're learning is about meat and milk, that when you eat meat, you have to rinse your mouth, eat something, you have to wait 6 hours. We learned the two reasons for that. One is because it gets stuck in your teeth. The other one because it takes 6 hours to digest the food in the stomach. So therefore you have to eat something, rinse your mouth. And we said also, according to halacha, the way we hold, it has to be in a different meal. In other words, you can be by a same meal that you're sitting, let's say, for 8 hours at the meal, and you started eating meat, and then in the same meal, 6 hours later, you're going to go and eat milk. It has to be a separate meal. In other words, you have to bench, say alamichya, or benching, or brain of whatever it is, and then you have to rinse your mouth, eat something, and also you have to change the tablecloth. That we didn't get to yet last week, but I'm mentioning it now. And that is, you can't have the same tablecloth that you ate a meat meal on at the same time eating dairy. Generally speaking, we know that people have to have separate tablecloths for meat and milk. They should have separate dish towels for meat and milk. That's ideal, even though technically if you don't, you have the same towel and it's washed and it's clean, it's not a problem. But I'm saying, generally speaking, the Jewish custom is you have dishes for meat, towels for meat dishes, towels for dairy dishes, meat tablecloths, dairy tablecloths. Now, you don't have to necessarily do that. You can eat, let's say, dairy on the table itself, and then whenever you want to eat meat, you put a tablecloth or a towel or something, a mat, that you're not eating on the same table or the same tablecloth that you're going to be eating meat at the same time. Okay. Now, what happens if somebody ate cheeses? Okay, so if it's a hard cheese that was aged for 6 months, so then al pi din you have to wait 6 hours between that and meat. Also, rinsing your mouth, eating something in between, that you have to rinse your mouth and eat something and wait 6 hours. Why? Because because it's aged, it gets stuck more in the teeth, it's harder to digest, and so on and so forth. Like say Parmesan cheese is considered halachically 6-hour cheese. The regular cheeses that you have, mozzarella, Munster, those cheeses basically are not aged, and therefore you wouldn't have to wait 6 hours. But cheeses, the real good cheeses, the blue cheeses, or in halachas, ones that had worms in them, whatever, you couldn't eat the worms anyway. But, cheese that was aged for 6 months, halachically needs to have, you need to wait 6 hours afterwards. Now, what happens if somebody cooked something parav, okay? Somebody cooked something parav in a meat container. In a meat pot, okay? You cooked macaroni in a meat pot, okay? Then I eat the macaroni. Do I have to wait 6 hours? Do I not have to wait 6 hours? What's the story? Is that macaroni actually meat? And also, can I put cheese on it? Okay, am I allowed to put cheese on it? is a very practical case. People make various macaroni. They want to know if they could put cheese on it, or they want to make it if they could put meat sauce into it. So the din is basically as follows. If the pot is clean, okay, if the pot is clean and was not used for 24 hours for meat, okay, so the pot is clean, the pot was not used for 24 hours for meat, and you cook something parv in it, that is 100% parv. You can even put cheese on it, okay? So if somebody cooked macaroni, for example, in a meat pot that's clean and wasn't used for 24 hours for meat, you're allowed to put even cheese in it. If it was used within 24 hours for meat, so then the din is, the pasta is parv, but you cannot eat it together with meat. You can eat it right before or right after, but you cannot eat it together with the meat. If the pot wasn't used for 24 hours, then you can even put cheese on it. Okay, even though it's cooked in a meat pot. You have a similar case. By the way, this is a very common case that happens. I'll give you a very simple example. Somebody made Shabbos, okay? They cooked their chicken in the oven, whatever, and now they want to bake a cake in that same oven. So let's say the oven is clean, and you're putting in a parva cake, okay? Now, did this cake become fleshik? Does this cake become fleshik? In other words, what is the question? Can I eat it Shabbos morning with a cup of coffee? Now, there's one thing for sure, you don't have to wait 6 hours after the cake. But if the oven was used for meat within 24 hours, that cake that you bake cannot be eaten together with milk. You could eat it right before, you can eat it right after, you cannot eat it directly with milk or cheese. The same thing would be reversed. If somebody made something in a milchik pot, and now they want to, like we said, you made a pasta and a spaghetti in a milchik pot, and now you want to put the meat in it, meat sauce in it. So again, if the pot was clean and not used for 24 hours for dairy, then you could put meat into the actual pasta. If it was used within 24 hours, the din is you cannot eat it together with meat or milk, whatever the opposite gender is, so to speak, but you can eat it right before or right after. That's the halacha as far as these things go. Now, there's a lot of details in this din. Okay, for instance, okay, we'll leave it at that. That's the generalization of it, that people get the general idea. But again, that's only if the pot is clean and not used. If you just made chicken soup in the pot and the pot is still dirty, and now you're going to put in spaghetti or you're going to put macaroni, whatever, so then that macaroni, is pretty fleshik. Okay, because, but again, if it wasn't used and it's clean, so then you can eat the cake directly with milk, with meat. Or, that cake that was baked in a fleshik oven, you would be allowed to eat directly with milk. Otherwise, you can eat it before or after. This is, by the way, a very interesting issue while we're on this topic. Sometimes you see, they're stopping it now, but the OU used to have what was called DE. They would have certain things that were called DE. Now, DE means dairy equipment. Dairy equipment means that the food itself is parv, but was made in a dairy oven or stove or machine. It was made in a dairy equipment with heat. So therefore, what's the din? What's the status on that din of that DE stuff? Now, very simply, if you keep Chol of Yisrael, the way we do, with the strictnesses and seriousness of Cholav Yisrael, you would not be allowed to eat that food at all. Because it was made in kalim of non-Cholav Yisrael. We hold that non-Cholav Yisrael, you have to kosher the kalim before you eat something of Cholav Yisrael or whatever you're going to be eating in that utensil. So people that keep Cholav Yisrael would not be allowed to eat that food at all. But what happens to people that don't keep Cholav Yisrael? Why are they telling you it's DE? Because they want to let you know that this is parv, but you cannot eat it directly with meat. You cannot eat it directly with meat. For instance, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have margarine. I'm not saying that there's such a thing exists or not. I'm just giving you examples. If you have margarine, and let's say the margarine says OUDE or OKDE, whatever it may be. So this margarine is parv, or else they would write OUD or OKD. But they're not writing it's milchik. They're saying DE. Again, they're stopping this more and more. They're just writing D, even if it's just the utensils. But if it's, let's say, OKDE or OUDE, that means you cannot put this margarine on top of meat. You can't. Because you can't, it's DE, it's their equipment. You can eat it before, you can eat it after, right before, right after, but you can't eat it together. So that's, or if somebody made a food that's hot and they want to serve it together with the fish. Okay? So let's say they made a part of a side dish of fish. Not the fish, the side dish of fish. In a meat oven that was just used for meat. It's clean. Now, we said you can't, in a dairy, I'm sorry, they want to make it in a dairy oven. Okay? That was used within 24 hours. But they want to serve it with the fish. They don't want to serve it with the meat. So that's not an issue. Because, again, it's not fleshik. It's not milchik. It's parv. And you're not eating it together with the meat. Because the fact that it was used within 24 hours for meat would make it that you can't eat it together with milk. Or if it was made within 24 hours of milk, you can't eat it directly with meat. But you can eat it before or after. So if somebody is making a side dish, let's say, in a dairy oven that wasn't used for 24 hours, or even if it was used for 24 hours, you can eat it with the fish. And it's not an issue. Because you're not eating meat together with it, you're eating meat right before or right after, and that's not an issue. Okay, that's that general din. People should at least know the general guidelines, and then you can figure out how the details fall into place. Okay, again, we mentioned before, but this is the din here, that you're not allowed to eat on the same tablecloth of meat and milk. So let's say you ate cheese on the tablecloth, now you want to eat meat. You have to take off the tablecloth, you have to clear off all the crumbs, and you're not allowed to eat on the same tablecloth or the same mat that you ate meat with. Now also, you should try to make sure, this is a very, very important din that can cause a lot of problems in the kitchen. I'm going to say the general guidelines that people should just be aware of what the shaila is, because many times you have to ask God of a shaila because there could be a lot of complications in this din. If there's things that are called sharp foods, it's called in Hebrew davar chodef. They're foods that are sharp. Yes, we said if you use a placemat on top of a tablecloth, that's fine. But you can't use the same placemat or the same tablecloth for meat and milk, one after another, but you can't use the same tablecloth because there's crumbs and there's things that spill and so on and so forth. If you put a towel on top of the tablecloth or a placemat, then that's fine. You're eating in a separate place. But now you have like this. What happens? Now there's sharp foods. Okay, what are sharp foods practically speaking? Onions, lemons, garlic, hot peppers, things like that are called sharp foods. Now, what happens if somebody cuts an onion with a meat knife? That onion becomes meat. Even if the knife wasn't used for 24 hours. Even if the knife wasn't used for meat for 10 weeks and the knife is clean. The fact that you're cutting into a sharp food, this applies basically to cutting into a sharp food. The fact that you're cutting into a sharp food with an onion, with a knife, a fleishik knife, that onion becomes fleishik. Why? The charifas, the sharpness of the oven, of the onion, makes the not within 24 hours as if it is within 24 hours. In other words, normally we learned in the past, we're going to learn more details about that eventually. After 24 hours, if you have a pot that you cooked the meat in, and the pot is clean, and it wasn't used for 24 hours, and by mistake you cooked dairy in the pot, the food is kosher. Okay? If somebody by mistake was eating a bowl of chicken soup, and by mistake they took a dairy spoon, and the dairy spoon was not used for 24 hours, the soup is okay. You have to kosher the spoon, but the soup is okay. Why? Because after 24 hours, the dairy that's in the spoon is not dairy anymore. It's called a blemish taste. Okay? So therefore you cannot use such a spoon, l'chatchila. But if by mistake it was used and it wasn't used for 24 hours, then it's not really dairy, and then you're not making the soup. You don't have a problem with the soup. Okay? But if it's something sharp and you're cutting it, that, like an onion, that onion becomes fleishik. I'm not going into details, like if you cut the onion in half, okay? How much of the onion on both sides of the cut become fleishik? There's an amount for that. But I just want to make people aware of the fact that if I cut an onion or a lemon or a garlic with a meat knife, that onion is meat. It's fleishik. Many times in the kitchen, what happens is people, by mistake, they see in a refrigerator, there's an onion, half an onion in the refrigerator. They don't even realize it's an issue. They don't ask. They don't care, whatever the situation is. And they'll take the onion out of the refrigerator and they'll cut it to put on a cheese sandwich. They'll take cheese with tomato and the onion. Now they're taking the onion, which is a fleishik onion, and they're putting it onto dairy cheese. That will make the thing treif. You're not allowed to eat that food. What happens if somebody that cut an onion with a meat knife cooked it in a dairy pot with parva stuff? A shaila must be asked, depending how much there is, what the percentage is, and so on and so forth, how the onion was cut. Was it cut only once? Was it sliced? Was it diced? There's a lot of details in this. But people need to be aware that if you cut an onion with a meat knife, that entire onion is meat. You cut it with a dairy knife, it's dairy. And if it's dairy, you cannot use any part of that oven for meat. If you cut it with a meat knife, you cannot use any part of that onion with dairy. You just can't, because it became fleishik. Same thing applies to a lemon, same thing applies to garlic, hot peppers, or anything like that. And these, by the way, a lot of times people call me that the kids or the maid or somebody didn't know that somebody cut the onion with a fleishik knife. So by the way, if you're doing that, it would always be good to mark on it meat or fleishik or whatever it is, that people should know that this onion should not be used with the opposite gender, whether it's meat or milk, whichever one it is. But that is a big problem, cutting any sharp food, and that's what happens with it. In fact, it says, in Kitzur Shchanarch, it says, if you cut an onion with a meat knife or any other sharp thing, and you put it into a milchik of food, you have to ask a shayla. Okay? Because I'll give you a simple example. You cut an onion with a meat knife, and now somebody doesn't know. They're making a fried egg with cheese, and they cut the onion and they put it into the frying pan. Okay? So now the problem is the frying pan treif? The food for sure you can't eat. But how far does it go? Does it also make the pan, the frying pan, not kosher or not? So then again, you have to ask a shaila because there's too many details that are relevant. What if that's if you use the power of a knife. That's why in the old Yiddish houses, the custom was, they not only did they have meat and dairy, they used to have pariv, okay? And any time they would cut an onion or a garlic or lemon, they would cut it with a pariv, a knife. And then it's not milk, it's not flesh, you can do with it whatever you want. Okay? But in these things, you have to be careful. Now, somebody just said something, 1 second. I'm going to comment about that because here. Can we put parv stuff in a milchik blender and eat it after meat? Now, not necessarily. If there's anything sharp in there, you wouldn't be allowed to. But again, it depends. You should, in a blender, if you're putting onions or lemons or things like that in a blender, there's blades, and that's cutting the sharp food. So then, if it's a part of a blender, it's not a problem. If it's a milchik blender and you're gonna blend onions in that milchik blender, those lemons are milchik because it's a dairy blender. It would be a meat blender, then it would become the lemons would become meat, or the garlic, or whatever it is. Okay, next. Now there's a din that people are more lenient today because of whatever, like they say in English, whatever. Years ago, okay, let me tell you what it says in halacha, and I'll discuss the practicalities of it. It says if you make a food with almond milk. Now almond milk is parv. Okay? If you make a food with almond milk, it says in Shulchan Aruch, you have to put some almonds in it because people might think it's dairy milk. They don't know milk. The milk is milk. It's white. So they're going to see almond milk. In fact, years ago, I remember growing up, if somebody served margarine at a fleishik meal, everybody did this across the board. If somebody would serve margarine at a meat meal, they would leave it in the container that said margarine on it. They would actually leave it in the container. Everybody could see that it's not butter and it's margarine. Or years ago, it was a big issue when parva ice cream first started coming out. It's not that old, by the way, parva ice cream. When parva ice cream came out and people were serving it at the end of meals, okay? Basically, and that was the minhag in those days, by the way, that people would put the container, the parva ice cream container on the table that everybody should see it's parv. Because there's a concept called maras ayin. Maras ayin means you're not allowed to do things that people will assume you're doing something incorrectly. And therefore you wouldn't be allowed to do it. So therefore people don't know it's margarine, maybe it's butter. Now the reason why people are lenient today, you go to a simcha, you see on the table they have these blobs of different colored margarine and all that. Why today don't they put the label on the table? The answer is because by now everybody knows there's parva margarine. Everybody today knows there's parva ice cream. But if they would come out with a new food that people don't know is parva, and then they would always assume that it was a milchik, food, you'd have to have the container on the table. Like in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, it says that if you're serving something made out of almond milk, you have to have almonds in the food that people should know that it's parv. Another din that we're just going to start today and continue with Mitzvah Shem next week, and that is, we mentioned this in Hilchos Pesach also. There's a Magen Avram that writes that the meaning is we don't kosher utensils from meat to milk or milk to meat. Why is that? Why can't you kosher from meat to milk or milk to meat? So they write, Magen Avram writes, because you might, if that's what you're going to do, you're going to have one utensil and you're going to keep koshering it. In other words, you use it for milk, you'll wait 24 hours, you'll kosher it, use it for meat. Then you wait 24 hours, you kosher it, use it for milk, and keep on going. What's the problem with that? Who remembers what you used it last for? Nobody's going to remember. So then you'll end up using the same container for meat and milk. So therefore, Magen Avram writes, the minig is we don't kosher for meat and milk. But according to many opinions, that's only when you kosher, and the world is lenient with this, that's only when you kosher with boiling hot water, which was called hagala, the purging method. When you kosher with boiling hot water, then you don't kosher for milchis to fleishiks. But if you're going to be koshering with libun, which is either blowtorching it red hot, or even leaving kal, according to the Alter Rebbe, whose paskins are differently than a lot of other authorities, then you don't need to wait 24 hours. So let's say you want to self-clean your oven from meat to milk. You don't have to, and using self-cleaning, you don't have to wait 24 hours between meat and milk. According to the Alter Rebbe, even if you're not using self-clean, you're going to turn it on to the highest for an hour, whatever it is, according to the Alter Rebbe, you also don't need to wait between 24 hours between meat and milk. But then you could kosher, that process, you could kosher from meat to milk and milk to meat. But again, the custom is from milk to meat, we don't kosher utensils with hagala, with the hot water process. Okay, we're going to go now to Tanya.